The village of Nshogo lay cradled between rolling hills and the thick embrace of the ancient forest. The trees stood tall like silent sentinels, their dark canopies whispering secrets in the wind. In this village, tradition was law, and superstition wove itself into the fabric of daily life. The villagers feared the unknown, respected the spirits, and shunned anything that carried the scent of misfortune. But Zuri was different. While others listened to their elders' warnings, she listened to the rustling leaves. While the village children played by the riverbanks, Zuri wandered near the forbidden edges of the forest, her small hands collecting strange stones with colors that shimmered in the fading sunlight. She traced the bark of ancient trees, whispering questions to the wind as if expecting an answer. Her grandmother, Reby, watched with weary eyes. She had raised Zuri alone, guiding her with the wisdom of ancestors long past. But Zuri was stubborn, filled with a curiosity that could not be tamed. One evening, as the sky bled into hues of orange and violet, Zuri ventured farther than before. The air carried the scent of damp earth, and the hum of insects filled the silence. Then, a sound broke through, the faint, pitiful cry of something small and fragile. She followed it. Nestled between the roots of a great iroko tree lay a bird, its feathers dull, its wing bent at an unnatural angle. Its tiny chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. Zuri knelt beside it, her fingers brushing against its trembling form. In her village, wounded animals were seen as omens. To touch one was to invite misfortune. It was said that such creatures carried the weight of wandering spirits, seeking bodies to inhabit. If the elders found out, they would demand she leave it behind. But Zuri could not. She cupped the bird in her hands, feeling the rapid flutter of its heartbeat against her palm. "You won't die," she whispered. She wrapped it carefully in the folds of her shawl and turned back toward the village, her heart pounding. If anyone saw, if anyone knew. She slipped through the narrow paths unseen, weaving between mud huts and the glow of flickering oil lamps. She could already hear the rhythmic sound of the elders gathered around the central fire, their voices carrying stories of warnings and fate. Her grandmother sat outside their small hut, her sharp eyes catching Zuri's hurried steps. "What have you done, child?" Ryby's voice was heavy with something between exhaustion and fear. Zuri hesitated. She knew what she should say. She should lower her gaze, shake her head, and let the moment pass. But instead, she lifted the edges of her shawl, revealing the tiny, broken creature nestled inside. Her grandmother inhaled sharply, pressing her lips into a thin line. "Zuri, you know what they will say." "It's just a bird," Zuri said, her voice quiet but firm. Ryby closed her eyes for a long moment, then exhaled. She did not argue. Instead, she reached out, her weathered fingers brushing against the bird's fragile body. "Then let us hope," she murmured, "that the spirits are not watching." Zuri took the bird inside, ignoring the way the wind outside suddenly changed, rustling through the trees like a whisper of something unseen. The small hut was dimly lit by the flickering glow of a single oil lamp. Zuri sat cross-legged on the woven mat, watching over the tiny bird cradled in a soft bundle of cloth. Its feathers, now clean of dirt, shimmered faintly in the lamplight, their deep hues shifting between green, blue, and gold with every movement. Her grandmother had barely spoken since the night Zuri brought the creature home. Ryby had only sighed, shaken her head, and muttered prayers under her breath. But Zuri had no doubt that her grandmother watched, observing the bird with wary eyes. The creature healed faster than Zuri had expected. The twisted wing, which had seemed so lifeless when she found it, began to regain strength within days. It stretched its limbs, fluttering weakly at first but with increasing confidence as time passed. But it wasn't just its swift recovery that unsettled her, it was the way it behaved. Each morning, Zuri would wake to find the bird outside its resting place, perched atop the carved wooden box that sat on the far shelf. It would tap its beak against the polished surface, a rhythmic sound that filled the small hut before dawn. Tap. 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 At first, she thought it was merely an accident, the bird moving as it pleased. But then it began happening every night, as if the creature was drawn to the box. It never tried to open it, never pecked hard enough to cause damage. It only tapped. Zuri had never paid much attention to the box before. It had always been there, one of the many relics her grandmother kept, filled with small trinkets, old beads, and whispers of a past Zuri had never been told. But now, as the bird continued its strange ritual, she couldn't help but feel that it was trying to tell her something. Her grandmother noticed. One evening, as Zuri prepared fresh leaves for the bird's injured wing, Reby finally spoke. That bird, her voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it. It is not just any creature. Zuri paused, glancing at her grandmother. What do you mean? Ryby's gaze was fixed on the bird, her expression unreadable. I have seen one like it before. Long ago, when I was a girl. Zuri sat up straighter. Her grandmother rarely spoke of her past, let alone with such seriousness. What happened? Ryby's fingers traced the patterns on her staff, her brow furrowed as if searching for the right words. There were stories, she said at last, of birds like this one. Not ordinary creatures, but messengers, servants of spirits long forgotten. They do not appear without reason, Zuri. Zuri looked back at the bird, now resting peacefully on the wooden box. But it's just a bird, she said, though her voice wavered slightly. Her grandmother gave her a long, searching look. Is it? For the first time since she had found it, doubt crept into Zuri's heart. That night, she lay awake, watching the bird as it sat motionless on the shelf. The oil lamp flickered, casting shadows along the hut's walls. The village outside was quiet, save for the distant hoot of an owl and the whisper of the wind through the trees. Then, without warning, the bird stirred. It fluttered once, twice, then, with a final burst of strength, it took off, its wings slicing through the air like a blade. Zuri gasped, sitting up as it soared toward the open window. Wait! But the bird did not stop. It vanished into the night, disappearing into the darkness beyond the village. Zuri scrambled to her feet, rushing toward the window, but there was nothing, only the silent trees swaying in the moonlight. And then she saw it. Lying on the wooden box, exactly where the bird had perched every night before, was a single feather. It glowed faintly, pulsing softly like a dying ember under the pale silver light. The morning sun bathed the village in golden light, casting long shadows across the thatched roofs and dirt paths. Zuri sat outside the hut, her fingers tracing the glowing feather from the night before. It no longer pulsed with light, but she could feel something strange about it, something alive. She was still lost in thought when she heard the familiar sound of wings cutting through the air. Looking up, her breath caught. The bird had returned. It hovered above her, its iridescent feathers catching the sunlight, shimmering between hues of emerald and sapphire. But it did not land. Instead, it circled above her head, its movements deliberate, expectant. Zuri's heart pounded. She rose to her feet, the feather still clutched in her palm. What do you want? She whispered. The bird gave no answer. But then, as if it knew she had asked, it broke from its loop and flew toward the edge of the village. Zuri hesitated. She knew the outskirts well, the boundary where the land of the villagers ended and the unknown began. Beyond that lay the thick, ancient forests that no one dared to enter. It was forbidden, whispered to be a place where spirits roamed, where old gods still slept beneath the roots of trees older than time. But the bird did not look back. It perched on a low-hanging branch, tilting its head as if waiting. Zuri took a step forward. Her feet moved before her mind could object. She walked past the last of the village huts, past the old well where the children played, past the fields where women pounded grain. No one noticed her leave. The bird led her deeper into the unknown, gliding effortlessly through the warm morning air. Finally, it landed. Before her stood an ancient tree, its bark rough and dark with age. But it was the carvings that made her breath hitch. Symbols. Faint, worn by time, but still visible, etched into the tree like silent words from a forgotten past. Zuri reached out, her fingers brushing over the grooves. The shapes were unlike anything she had ever seen before, yet they felt strangely familiar, as if she had always known them but had simply forgotten. Her grandmother's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. "Zuri!" She turned to see Ma'ambi standing at the village's edge, her staff planted firmly in the ground, her face twisted with something between fear and anger. "Come back," her grandmother commanded. Zuri swallowed hard. "Grandmother, the bird. Leave it. Do not follow." The bird flapped its wings once, its beady eyes fixed on Zuri. It had not moved from its perch, nor had it tried to flee. Something deep inside her told her that if she turned back now, she would never know. She took another step forward. Her grandmother's voice trembled. "Zuri, do not let curiosity make you blind. There are things in this world that should remain untouched." Zuri turned to face her. But what if they were never meant to be forgotten? Ma'ambi looked at her granddaughter for a long time, the lines on her face deep with worry. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Then you must be willing to bear the cost of remembering." Zuri turned back to the tree. Her fingers pressed against the carvings, and the air around her seemed to shift. The bird let out a low, melodic sound, one that vibrated deep in her chest. And for the first time, the symbols on the tree glowed. The village slept beneath the silver glow of the moon, but Zuri lay awake, staring at the thatched ceiling of her hut. No matter how much she tried to push it from her mind, the carvings on the tree, the bird's expectant gaze, and the strange energy in the air refused to leave her thoughts. She had made a promise to her grandmother that she would not follow the bird. And yet, something deep inside her whispered that she had to go. Moving carefully so as not to wake Ma'ambi, she slipped out of the hut, her bare feet silent against the cool earth. The night air wrapped around her, thick and heavy with the scent of damp soil and distant rain. The village fires had burned low, their embers glowing faintly in the dark. Then, as if it had been waiting for her, the bird appeared. It glided down from the sky, its feathers shimmering even in the dim light, and without hesitation, it flew toward the forest. Zuri followed. Each step carried her farther from the safety of home, deeper into the world of shadows and secrets. The trees loomed high above her, their twisted branches like outstretched hands. The deeper she went, the quieter the world became. No chirping insects. No rustling leaves. Just silence. An unnatural silence. The air grew thick around her, pressing against her skin like something unseen was watching. The bird fluttered ahead, never too far, always waiting when she hesitated. Then, suddenly, she stopped. Her foot had hit something hard beneath the loose earth. A stone. Frowning, she crouched down, brushing her fingers against its surface. Her breath caught. The stone was covered in the same symbols as the tree. The same ancient carvings, weathered by time but still pulsing with something alive. Her hands trembled as she pushed away more dirt, revealing more of the markings. Then, the ground beneath her quivered. Zuri gasped and stumbled back as the earth shifted, the roots of a nearby tree curling away as if pulled by invisible hands. A deep, groaning sound echoed beneath her feet, like the breath of something long buried. And then, a passageway appeared. It was not just a hole in the ground, nor a simple opening beneath the roots. It was an entrance, perfectly carved, its sides lined with stone, leading down into darkness. The symbols on the stone glowed faintly, as if they recognized her touch. Zuri's heart pounded in her chest. The bird landed on the edge of the opening, tilting its head toward her. It was waiting. Calling her forward. She took a shaky breath, staring into the abyss below. She knew, without a doubt, that if she stepped into that passageway, there would be no turning back. The passageway swallowed her whole. Zuri stepped carefully, the cool stone beneath her feet sending shivers up her spine. The bird fluttered ahead, its feathers casting faint glimmers of light against the damp walls. The deeper she went, the heavier the air became, thick with the scent of earth and something ancient. Then, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. Her breath caught in her throat. The walls were lined with paintings, their colors still vivid despite the years that had passed. Scenes of people in flowing robes, their hands raised to the sky. Great cities with towering pillars, golden fields stretching far beyond. And symbols, the same ones she had seen on the tree, on the stone, and now, glowing softly in the chamber's dim light. A forgotten civilization. A world erased by time. Zuri stepped forward, her fingers brushing against the smooth, painted stone. The images whispered to her, telling a story she did not yet fully understand. Then, she saw it. At the center of the chamber, resting on an ancient altar, was a chest. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, ornate, its surface covered in swirling carvings that pulsed faintly, as if alive. The air around it seemed to hum, a presence both welcoming and foreboding. The bird landed gently on the chest, its eyes glowing for a brief moment. Click. The lock released. Zuri hesitated. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, the magnitude of what lay before her. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Inside. Gold, jewels, artifacts of intricate craftsmanship, their beauty unmatched by anything in the village. But these were not the true treasure. At the very bottom of the chest, wrapped carefully in layers of silk, were scrolls. She reached for them with trembling hands, unrolling the delicate parchment. Her eyes widened. The symbols. The same ones. But this time, they were more than just carvings in stone. They were words. Stories. Knowledge lost to time. The moment Zuri's fingers brushed the ancient parchment, the air inside the chamber shifted. A deep voice rumbled through the walls, neither human nor entirely spirit, yet carrying the weight of centuries. It spoke in a language unfamiliar yet strangely understood, each word vibrating through her bones. A warning. Zuri's breath hitched. She had thought she had merely found a hidden relic, a lost history buried beneath the earth. But this was something more. This treasure was not just wealth, it was power. A forgotten legacy that could change her village's fate forever. The bird flapped its wings anxiously, its body trembling with an unseen force. Then, the earth quivered. The walls pulsed, as if something beneath them was stirring, something that had been asleep far too long. Zuri turned sharply. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the chamber, twisting and coiling like living things. The paintings on the walls flickered, the figures shifting, faces once serene now etched with warning. She wasn't alone. The spirits that had once guarded this place were waking. And they were watching her. The bird, no longer an ordinary creature, stood at the center of the chamber, its shimmering feathers pulsing with light. Zuri watched, frozen, as the glow expanded, spreading outward like ripples on water. The restless shadows recoiled, their whispers fading into silence. The trembling earth stilled. The spirits had been waiting, not for gold, not for a thief, but for someone who would understand. Zuri's heart pounded as realization settled in. This was never about wealth. The glimmering treasures were nothing compared to the true inheritance buried here, the stories, the wisdom, the forgotten truths of a people who had once thrived where her village now stood. The bird turned to her, its glowing eyes locking onto hers. A message, wordless yet clear. She reached for one of the scrolls, lifting it carefully as if cradling something sacred. The weight of history pressed into her palms. This was what she had been meant to find. With one last, long look, the bird spread its wings. Light erupted once more, engulfing its body until nothing remained but the glow, then, darkness. It was gone. Zuri clutched the scroll to her chest. She didn't need riches. She needed to remember. She needed to share. As she stepped out of the hidden chamber and back toward the world above, she knew her journey was only beginning. The truth, waiting to be remembered. Zuri returns to the village, her heart heavy with the weight of her discovery. The journey back feels different, as though the very trees watch her with knowing eyes. The whispers of the forest no longer frighten her, instead, they seem to hum with quiet approval. She carries the scroll close to her chest, its presence warm against her skin, as if it, too, knows it has finally come home. But as she steps into the village, the familiar world feels distant. The moment she speaks, the reaction is immediate. Some laugh, shaking their heads at her tale of underground chambers and restless spirits. Others shrink away, muttering about curses, their fear thick in the air. But the elders listen. Their eyes darken with recognition at the symbols she describes, their faces lined with memories long buried. They exchange glances, silent and knowing, as if something once lost has stirred within them. Zuri watches as her words take root, not in all, but in some. And for the first time, she realizes that change does not happen all at once. It begins as a seed, small and fragile, waiting for the right hands to nurture it. Slowly, the village begins to change. The stories, once dismissed as mere myths, are spoken again around the fires at night. The forgotten carvings, once ignored, are traced by fingers eager to remember. The land, once feared, is walked with new eyes, no longer blind to what lay beneath it. And deep in the forest, where the bird once flew, the wind carries a whisper of gratitude, soft, fleeting, but there. Zuri had done what no one else dared. Her name becomes a legend, passed down for generations, just like the treasure she found. And though the bird is gone, its gift remains, not in gold or jewels, but in the stories that will never be forgotten again. Zuri's story was never just about the discovery of treasure, it was about rediscovering a forgotten history, about proving that courage and curiosity can unlock the secrets hidden beneath fear and superstition. When she first saved the dying bird, she had no idea that a simple act of kindness would set her on a path towards something greater. She defied the beliefs of her village, choosing compassion over fear, and in return, the universe rewarded her with knowledge long lost to time. Her journey into the forbidden depths of the forest was not just an adventure, it was a test. A test of her will, her faith in herself, and her connection to something beyond human understanding. She faced the unknown with open eyes, and in doing so, she became more than just a curious girl, she became the bridge between past and present. The treasure she found was more than gold or jewels. It was wisdom, the stories and knowledge of an ancient civilization that had once thrived on the very land her village stood upon. The spirits that guarded it had not wished for wealth to be taken, but for history to be remembered. When Zuri returned to her village, she was met with doubt, fear, and even laughter. But legends do not begin with instant belief, they begin with whispers, with small ripples that grow into waves over time. The elders listened, and slowly, change took root. Generations later, Zuri's name would not be remembered as the girl who found treasure, but as the girl who refused to let the past be forgotten. And deep in the forest, where the bird once guided her, the wind would always carry her name, whispering it through the trees, forever a part of the land she had fought to understand.